Yeah, looking at you.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Imaginative audio panel. Thank you for joining us. So we are here to talk about audio fiction, so whether that is audio drama, kind of improvised actual plays or narrated prose. We're going to talk about words said out loud. So with me are George, Penney, Emily, Inkpen, Devin, Martin and Nick Wells. George, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so obviously George Penney, I'm a writer, I've been in this business for 15 plus years, I'm a former historian, I've escaped academia. I have two podcasts called My Favourite Monster and Bohemiana. I recently launched a book called Over London. I now write comic fantasy exclusively, pretty much. If you would like to buy it, it just came out on Tuesday. And I also run really weird and fun TTRPG games that are sometimes recorded. I'm an absolute geek in short. My alignment is chaotic neutral, just in case anyone wanted to know. And my pronouns are she, her, they, them.
And Emily?
Yes, hello. I am the writer and co-director of a audio drama called The Dex Legacy. It's sci-fi, full cast, requires a lot of production, and I think that's me. I also write sci-fi novels and short stories and things, which are available in various places. My pronouns are she, her.
Devin?
Hi, I'm Devin Martin. I am the audio producer for Podcastle, which produces short fantasy stories every week in audio. That's me.
And Nick?
Yeah, my name's Nick Wells. I'm a listener to Podcastle and all of those. And number one, I'm very much an audio listener, mainly when I cycle to work and when I'm at my desk designing but not writing. I'm a publisher of Flame Tree. We make lots of fiction books, lots of non-fiction as well, on mythology and things like that. I have my own podcast called These Fantastic Worlds. I make a podcast for a local theatre company as well. We've made a lot of audiobooks.
Oh, and I'm Sasha, Sienna. I'm a writer and voice actor working on podcasts from Doctor Who Redacted to Magnus Archives, so audio drama, not that big of a range. And my pronouns are she, he, and they. Okay. Let's start with the other end of the table, Nick. What was your first experience of audio fiction? And where did your relationship with the medium begin?
Do you mean as a receiver?
As a receiver, yeah.
Okay, so when I was very young, I'm probably older than everyone on the panel, quite a lot older. So grew up in the 60s, listened to a lot of radio, and continue to listen to a lot of radio. Most of what I listened to then seems to have ported across to Radio 4 Extra, which I'll admit to listen to in the middle of the night. Listened to a lot of Radio 3 Greek dramas, as they were then, and the World Service. And I still listen to a lot of audio drama. And it moves me. I'm a great reader. I read all the time. I read hundreds of short stories every week for all of our books. I read a lot of our other novels that we publish as well, but I still listen to audio because I think it is a different kind of experience. Even though it's not fully described in front of you, it's just described enough to allow you to meet it in the middle and add your own imagination to it.
Devin, how about you? What was your first experience of audio fiction?
From a very young age, probably, my dad introduced it to me, just listening to audio dramas and sketch comedy and things on tape. He grew up without TV, having grown up in South Africa, where the apartheid government didn't like TV for various reasons. They thought it would ruin people's ideas of race purity. So that was a fun time for him. But, so the only way you could get fiction was to get bootleg versions of just the audio of TV shows and things. So that's how he would listen, and that's how he would experience TV and things, and so that's still how he experiences TV. He doesn't watch TV, he listens to TV. Anyway, it's a long story, I'm sorry.
No, we're here to talk, so thanks for talking.
So yeah, just in the car I listen to all these tapes, and that's, I just hadn't really thought about this at all until you asked the question over emails a couple of days ago, and so I know it's a weird digression, but I thought it was really interesting, so I thought I'd
Yeah, that's actually my first experience with audio fiction was also listening to bootleg tapes with my dad of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and yeah, there's something really kind of intimate and sociable about listening to audio drama together in a way that watching TV just isn't. So yeah, thank you for sharing.
Emily. Yeah, so Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Yes, I was basically raised on that when I was a kid. Again, cassette sort of recordings straight from the radio, I believe, and back in the day. So yeah, I was raised on that. The first time I saw spaceships was like in my head when listening to that, just through the sound effects and the way the characters reacted and the sort of the echo and the sound of the footsteps and everything. I had such a clear picture. And the Archers as well. My mum's a religious daily listener of the Archers, and so every day it was on. And it's not for everybody. This is probably the wrong crowd. Sort of sci-fi fantasy and sort of agriculture in the UK, but it's still quite a. It's a very well put together show. It was very good ongoing stories and very strong character, sort of ongoing character arcs. And so yeah, as a piece of audio work, it's incredibly impressive and one of the longest running shows. Well, I think it is the longest running serialized audio drama in the country, in the BBC.
Is it the longest running serialized show in the UK? I think.
Maybe, yeah. It could
But don't quote me on that. I'm not sure, but I think.
Speculative affirmation there. Yeah, so I started listening to audio probably at about 2 or 3. My parents were evangelical Christians in Outback, Australia, and they completely banned TV. But for some reason, my dad loved Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy. So I both listened to tapes about Jesus and Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy, and later a lot of Monty Python records. So it all started there, and then progressed into the libraries in Outback Australia had massive audiobook selections because there's a lot of illiteracy. So, but there are a lot of people wanted to listen to books on tape. So, and my dad was illiterate, so we would largely listen to a lot of comedy, a lot of drama. It was really great, actually. And the librarians there were just excellent. Literally, you just walk in and they wouldn't actually ask what you wanted. They'd just thrust a thing at you and say, listen to that. And yeah, so that was kind of where I started. So yeah, the comedy background started early.
Yeah.
It's a very clear CTA, isn't it? Listen to this.
Yes.
Okay. Very much so.
Librarians everywhere just knocking it out of the park.
Yeah.
Okay, so as a kind of general open question, why audio fiction? What does this medium offer that others don't?
It allows your imagination to add that extra element of what someone looks like. Mm-hmm. It also, especially for me, I was a really queer kid in a really straight environment, so it allowed me to actually imagine characters as way queerer than they actually were. For me, audio fiction was very, very important from that perspective. So you could have someone whose sound was very, very serious, but I could imagine them, with spiky hair, or I could imagine them a different color or a different race, depending on what the audio production was. I think it gives you more room to give yourself freedom. Well, that was certainly my background, and I think especially with fantasy fiction audio, there's a lot more room for that, or science fiction maybe as well.
Yeah, I think it's and Nick, you touched on this as well when you were talking about your introduction to it, audio fiction as well. It's that middle ground of the pure imagination of the text, but also the performer's art.
Oh, absolutely.
So you benefit from the depth of character that an actor brings, but you still get the richness of your own imagination, and I think that nothing else can do both.
Yeah, I think as a sort of writing for audio or writing audio drama, it's a collaboration. I mean, the whole process is a collaboration. When you're writing a book, the words are the end product. When you're writing a script, the words are step one, and then you're building on top of that with the performance, and then the final step is the audience, and the audience bringing their own sort of visualization to the table, and that kind of thing, like you're saying, the visual kind of stimulus that you get from audio is completely different. It's the sound effects, it's the atmosphere, it's the music, it's everything sort of sets a scene in a way that just reading a novel doesn't, and in a way that when you're watching a movie, that's taken away. You don't get that level of imagination that you can bring as a listener to that to the medium.
I think that's right. A movie is the most extreme opposite, because it's a very compressed experience. Even a massive screen, fantastic effects, all these fabulous actors, but actually you're being served a particular experience, and lots of movies obviously carve you into a particular emotional experience. When we do audio books, one of the big discussions is, do we actually deliver a single flat voice, which is replicating someone else's version, let's say skillfully, but of the way they read it in their own heads, or do we actually have a slightly more performative read? So do you allow a fabulous actor like Fry, who can do all these lots of fabulous voices? In some ways that goes a little too far. You almost might as well do an audio drama and do that, and therefore it would be really good. But the other thing I wanted to say actually was that one of the reasons I really like audio is the Foley.
Absolutely.
Which I used to go to the radio theatre when I was very young, and just be in the audience, and there was someone always in the corner, surrounded by all this paraphernalia, being the horse and doing all horns and using violins in really interesting ways. And these days you don't see that very much. These days it's all effects libraries and you're clicking buttons and so on. But the effect still to the reader, to the listener, is still fascinating, and it gives a depth that you can't quite imagine when you read yourself.
I've got an anecdote about that.
Yeah,
if there's space for that. Okay, so one morning I woke up on the weekend, and I got to my phone a message from my producer Chris Gregory saying, so what exactly does the process of breaking an X sound like? What? I've got my microphone set up. I'm thinking vegetables.
It's always vegetables.
It's always vegetables. And he said, and there was a little track of him breaking. He was like, "This is a cucumber." So I was like, I haven't even had a first cup of tea yet. I was like, all right, listen to the cucumber, and I just went back saying, too wet. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Too savage.
But surely it would sound a little wet. Is a carrot too dry?
Yes. Okay, so the
3
carrot.
carrots and a cucumber.
It's the carrot combined. Okay, this is what we went for. It was a cocktail, and it was because the carrot. So the neck snapping. I'm going to be a bit graphic here. This is quite a violent show. Is sort of like a pull and a twist. Okay, so it's not just it's like a pull and a twist. Okay, so the carrot has this lovely, like, slightly squeaky sound just before it goes, and then if you get a pepper, and twist it while you're breaking it, it has a sort of kind of sound to it, and then combined with the carrot, you get, well, you know, you get a similar sound. I mean, in my sleep-deprived state, I was like, why can't you get a sound of a broken neck and, you know, anything? And then I was like, oh yeah, no, that's fine. Oh yeah, no, that's, oh god, no.
So this is why audio fiction. You get all of that, and then at the end you have a salad.
He had a carrot. You know, it was good.
Someone has probably recorded a kid have a neck thing broken.
Yeah, but that's going to be on the dark web, no?
I mean, on the dark web, there's probably, yeah.
If you
I should
are
start.
interested in Foley, I really do recommend. The BBC has a huge library of all these sound effects that they've just stored up and archived, and it is so fun to just go and listen to the sounds that they've recorded from things like snapping carrots and things like that.
Unfortunately, sadly, I have some of the LPs and some of the CDs. And I still use them in some of the stuff that I made. Have to convert it, obviously. But they're still really good sounds,
They're so good.
acoustically
So
recorded.
crunchy.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of positives about working in audio drama, but also audio fiction. So what are some of the limits and challenges of working in audio?
I've got a story from the perspective of an author whose work has been converted into audio. Two examples. One, if anyone here is a writer who has not yet sold their audio rights, guard them like they are honestly in a chest in a small room with a dragon on
Like
top of
Davy
it.
Jones.
Oh yes, yeah. Do not give away your audio rights without knowing who the narrators might be, knowing whether or not you're going to get a say. This is 10 plus years ago. I gave my rights away just willy-nilly, just have my rights, and I then heard the book, and it was so. I still get emails from people going, "I'd like to listen to your audiobook, but I can't get past the first." Yeah, and it's done through a really good production company. It's one of Australia's best production companies, but the narrator that they picked was just not fit with the content. It was just a bad day, and I didn't have a say because the contract that I signed, just thinking, oh, this would be fine. That was the first one. But also I've had overwhelmingly positive experiences. For example, the audiobook that we just did with Over London is with Brendan McDonald. I don't know if you guys know C.K. McDonald, Queef McDonald's narrator. If you haven't heard Queef stuff, we heard Brendan and just nabbed him within seconds, and it's one of the most positive experiences I've ever had. But the other one is my publisher. Be very careful with your publisher. If you are with Trad Publishing, if they want to use your content and read it out loud, make sure you have a say in that, and that's somewhere in your contract. My publisher, this was a very large publisher, and they decided to put it on a podcast and give it to one of their interns, one of my books to one of their interns to read, and to basically torture him as a joke. And then they sent me the files saying, oh, isn't this wonderful, George? We featured you on a major Australian, podcast. And it's basically the equivalent of give the intern a horrible thing to read or a horrible thing to read. And I'm listening to it going, you've made my work a joke, you've made my work torture. And to them, this was, again, my editor, and my editor was lovely. They had no empathy. They didn't realise that might not sell my book. People might not think that that's a selling point. She honestly didn't know. So just be very, very careful when you are looking at audio rights, because good audio is amazing. Bad audio is just a passion killer. It's they can put people off your work.
Yeah, I think there's something in there. Sorry to interject. If anybody knows, if anybody works in British audio fiction, you probably know Ella Watts. And she put together this piece of research into the state of audio fiction and why audio drama works. And one thing that she found was that there is a kind of psychological effect of when somebody is listening to something, their guard is down more emotionally and kind of cognitively than if they are reading it or watching it on television, or if somebody's speaking to them personally. If you've got your headphones in, it's a more intimate thing. And that means that you can be more persuasive, you can have a kind of bigger emotional beat, but it also does mean that when narration hits, it's great, but if the narration is going to be an issue, it can be incredibly grating, I think. Yeah. Emily, from a completely different side of it, as somebody who works on the production of a a full cast audio drama, what would your answers be to this question?
Limitations of audio drama. Okay, so I can say this from a writer's point of view. Okay, now when you're writing for audio, you can write in many, many different styles. You can have a narrator that comes in and then cast multiple characters for dialogues and scenes. You can have just, and the narrator could be completely separate. The narrator could be the main character who narrates the prose and then goes into a scene. You can do all sorts of things. Narrators, there's a podcast called Girl in Space, and what we're looking at here is ways to overcome the fact that people can't see, and you're getting across the imagery. And it is tricky to do that sometimes. And so in Girl in Space, she has a voice recorder and she makes notes, and it's like a vocal diary that she's taking. And so every now and again she clicks on this thing and then she just talks into the diary, like the recorder, and says, I am seeing da 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 da. And it's a very nice device for getting across visuals. And when I started doing Dex is very cinematic. And when I started writing episode 1, I really played with the idea of a narrator, but it didn't work. And I ended up saying it's got to be full cinematic, which means that it is just the sound effects and just the characters talking. There's no other way to get across the visuals. And that is challenging for obvious reasons. There have been times I wrote a whole scene. I had this scene in my head, a single character seeing something, like having this experience, and I wrote it all out in prose. But there was no way to translate it as a single character experience into audio, and I was thinking, I can't break the no narrator rule in episode 5. It's the kind of thing you have to bring in episode 1 and keep it consistent. You can't just suddenly have a single scene. So I wrote it out in prose, and then I translated it. I brought in another character so that they could talk amongst each other, and share the experience verbally. And that kind of thing is a limitation, but also it's kind of like limitation is the mother of invention kind of situation, because you're faced with these issues and then you have to overcome them. And yeah, I would say that it's very limiting in that way, but at the same time, vivid. Even though I don't have any descriptions of anything, people have said to me, it was such a vivid introduction to your world. And I'm thinking, how? How was it? Nobody's standing there saying, oh, but that's a beautiful flower with red petals that are in a double layer. And like, no, nobody's saying that. But people fill in the gaps incredibly. And, it's amazing. But yeah, I mean, it is a challenge. And yeah, a big one.
And speaking of writing like full cast audio dramas, I feel like, certainly for me, I thought I wrote naturalistic dialogue until I heard an actor say it, and I did not. Devin, what kind of thing did you look for kind of producing prose podcasts?
So, I mean, I have no say in what we produce. By the time stuff comes to me, the editors have chosen what we're doing. I just get the narration in, and then I work with the recording and make it ready for putting up online. So
I feel like Devin is downplaying very much how much of a challenge that is, because I'm aware of how long it takes to do that.
It's a lot of work. I'm not trying to say it's no work. It's just there's not really any choices there per se. So the challenges of audio have already happened. It's just up to me to deal with them. And I'm dealing with something that is a text that has been translated, but it's been made into audio, and then I'm doing the best I can with it at that point. So the challenges I face are what's the narrator's equipment like? What's their environment like? And usually we try and deal with their issues before they've recorded the whole thing.
Ideally.
There are a lot more practical considerations, I think, to recording.
But sometimes time is an issue.
Thank you. And Nick, as someone who primarily works, I believe, with written novels, when you're looking to turn something into an audiobook, are there any particular challenges there?
So I've got two things to share with you, partly because of that difference between the novel into an audio and a created piece, because I do podcasting as well, and therefore a lot of audio editing, and you can change the narrative flow and the perception, and if you're not careful, the authenticity of what you're trying to present. Whereas with a story or a novel or a short story, it is what it is, and therefore you've got to find a very, very good narrator who can deliver that story. Because my experience is that within a millisecond that the story isn't for you if the voice isn't right.
Yes.
So in some ways you've got to kind of sneak the voice in, have a warm voice so that actually brings people in, so that they are engulfed in the story, almost seduced by it. But those are two very, very different challenges. But one of the biggest challenges is cost, just generally.
Absolutely.
It's just an expensive thing to do, and it is therefore tempting to cut corners. And if you do that, you've got to be very careful. That's why I end up doing lots of audio editing, because it's an expensive thing to do. Sometimes the hourly rates of some of the voice actors are really much more to do with their availability rather than their actual ability. And some people want a voice attached to an audio rather than just a really good piece of audio.
Thank you. And looking at audio fiction as a whole, what kinds of stories are currently being told through audio fiction at the moment?
Lots.
Everything but silent movies.
Hasn't that always been the case?
Would be a very interesting half-hour slot, wouldn't it? Or no, the opposite.
It's very
really,
calming.
wouldn't it? Very calming.
I would actually love to see somebody try and do a sort of single episode of a podcast where there's no dialogue. It's all just sound effect.
That would
that
be
exists.
good.
Yeah, I think it does. I'll have to see if I can dig it out. Yeah.
If you can think that someone's normally
Done it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think there's a really interesting thing at the moment. I'm a huge podcast listener, and I really enjoy dramatized nonfiction at the moment. How there's a very fine line.
Yeah, there is.
It's very much verging into the way they're telling the story. It's very fictional, very suspenseful. I'm enjoying how that's sort of blurred a little bit nowadays, and I think that's happening a little bit more. Especially, True Crime's been doing it for ages, but yeah.
I mean, that is audio fiction a lot of the time.
Yeah,
anyway.
that is really very good.
Yeah.
I would say, like, any story, every story is being told. One of the amazing things about the range of platforms that people can upload their work onto is that it has freed up sort of accessibility to making audio productions. And I think that when it came to creating platforms like, say, Apple Podcasts, for instance, they created their platform, I think they were expecting it to be podcasts as in, like, people doing shows, interviewing people, probably not fiction. And to the point that they only recently created a fiction category in their podcasts, and they've now got a sci-fi category, because sci-fi is so huge in audio drama. Probably because if you try and visualize it, it's very expensive because big sets and a lot of visual effects. But in audio, you can do it much easier with carrots
and peppers. It's great.
All you need is a wobble board, and there you
Exactly,
go.
and you're pretty much there. It's huge for sci-fi. It's also huge for horror, which isn't particularly surprising. Lots of suspense can be built up through, there's all of this going on, and it really frees up for creativity. And as a result, all kinds of stories are being told, and audio fiction is huge, really, really huge. The number of podcasts out there is, it's phenomenal. And there's the big production companies. So previously, the BBC used to be like, okay, well, if you've got an audio drama that you want to put out, it's got to go through a radio production company, and you've got to apply for that. And they're really big gatekeepers on this. And now we're seeing big production companies doing audio, like Realm and Q-Code and production companies like that use big actors and tell big stories, big budgets, and that makes it that they're sort of doing an interesting they're not indie, they're emerging from the indie kind of market, and it's an interesting time. But yeah, every kind of story, it's so interesting at the moment.
It's interesting what you say. I think it's absolutely true that there is more genre fiction in audio drama, I think, than there is in most other mediums at the moment.
But I do think it's podcasting that's driven that, and that's partly because of the entry point for boringly going on about cost again, but the entry point is very low, and actually people's expectations of a podcast are lower, and so you're not expecting an all singing, all dancing production, which means that when you do get something really good, it's pleasantly surprising. But it does mean that a lot of people have been experimenting, and well, as you know, I mean, podcasting itself has just blown up, and in some ways, some of it's gone a little bit too slick. And in order to be slick, it really needs to be very, very good. And I do think, though, it has given a lot of access to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
But sci-fi audio dramas are nothing new. There was War of the Worlds.
Yes,
absolutely.
50s,
Do you feel like that is because, like Emily was saying, it's so much cheaper to convey that kind of scale of story through audio than it is visually?
Yeah, probably.
I think it's also the tradition. I mean, there's such a nostalgia with science fiction as audio, like the War of the Worlds thing. I can just imagine the music. The minute you mention it, there's almost the minute I listen to a science fiction audiobook, I'm almost primed to know what's going to happen, or a sci-fi podcast, and I think it's that legacy.
Yeah, I wrote a piece a little while back saying audio is the home of sci-fi, because in many ways I think people's earliest sort of experiences of science fiction are through audio mediums. I think maybe that's a bold statement. It was for me,
and therefore,
and I know I'm not the only one, so it must be most people, right?
No, I think you're absolutely right that there is a real legacy there for sci-fi in audio fiction. So thinking of that legacy, how has audio fiction changed with the move from radio to podcasting? And would you say that there's a divide today between radio and podcast audio fiction?
In budget, yes. I don't know. I've sat in on some BBC kind of pitch briefs, and those are very, very interesting to sit in on. And I know the kind of budget that they deal with when it comes to producing. I think it's for 50 minutes of audio drama. They give you a budget of 25,000 for that. And
having worked for the BBC, not for everything.
no, not for everything. No, but I mean, well, that was the rate that my producer was said. It was 50 grand for that, and that's interesting. That's how they get the big actors, I guess.
Yeah, that's to be fair, a lot of it will be going on.
On the talent, and it's so it really does depend on that kind of thing. I think. I'm sorry. What was the question?
So the question is about how podcasting's changed, or how audio fiction's changed from the move from radio to podcasts, and is there still a divide? I think it's
that's well over a year of podcasting,
Yeah.
like several years of podcasting for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting that I don't know their entire budgets, but certainly from a writer's standpoint, the money that would be given for a Radio 4 drama and the money that would be given for a similar script from Audible or Spotify's podcasts are very much comparable. Possibly actually you get a little bit more from Audible and Spotify. Why is it that we would consider Audible and Spotify podcast rather than radio if the budget is the same?
As opposed to,
So we would consider something that's put out by Spotify or Audible a podcast rather than a radio? Is that because of...
it's just that podcasting is a modern medium, really,
Yeah.
and so it's sort of sexy. And they're using, both of those are using podcasting as to position themselves to the modern market, and they're throwing money at podcasting as though they were radio shows, but they also bring the brutality of that kind of commercial venture. I mean, they cut shows extremely fast. If it's not bringing the big bucks in, not bringing the celebrities in. Because my feeling, generally speaking, is once you start dealing with celebrities in podcasts, that's where it does become a radio show, really, or that crosses over in the medium. But there's in my mind there's a divide between the radio and the podcasting, because the podcasting is a democratizing process. Everybody can access it. You can do something really good and really exciting, but it's much harder to get into radio, and also radio itself is a diminishing market. I mean, BBC would say that, Big Finish would say that. People like Big Finish keep putting out these interesting Doctor Who episodes because that's what they know works. But that's not new. That's interesting if you like Doctor Who, but they're relying on that to try and make the radio shows. Whereas there's a lot more interesting stuff going on with podcasting.
I'd also say that this is a very English discussion in that for example in Australia we don't so much have the tradition of fictional radio. We just collect all the BBC productions. So what it's meant is that with the podcasting, it's actually meant that Australian voices and a really great own voices environment has been able to come up through. But we've got a very strong radio tradition. The ABC is fantastic. But as far as fiction, suddenly we're getting all of these amazing own voices that we never would have gotten, because largely the voices that we heard on radio were British in Australia. So back home, whenever I listen to stuff from home, it's just so refreshing now. And the Australian horror is fantastic. Like the genre fiction coming out of Australia in audio is out of this world good. Yeah. So that's quite exciting. It's not the British setup, but podcasting has allowed that to happen. Yeah.
I would say also that the BBC released their audio drama and productions that they've put out on radio. They release them afterwards on the podcast platforms, so they are appearing still. They're almost trying to milk both kind of mediums at that point. And their productions. When I was sitting in on the brief, it was like, is this production that we commission going to be popular on Apple Podcasts and on Audible? Because it has to be to justify us doing it for the radio.
Yeah.
And and will it translate, and will those audiences also like it, not just the audiences of Radio 4 and radio? And I found that very interesting. I kind of got a bit annoyed. It's like, no, you've got the platform.
Yeah.
No. You get one, BBC.
Have them all.
Yeah.
There's definitely something very interesting there, I think, about the difference between podcasts that are democratic, and coming out from a sort of grassroots creative scene, and podcasts that are maybe podcasts that are put out by production companies, maybe using the word not necessarily how a lot of people would use the word. So what are the differences between making self-produced audio fiction and working with one of those production companies? Emily, as someone whom I know has done both.
Oh, well.
Sorry, just to start things.
Well, no, the production company I work with is very, very indie. alternative stories is, well, I've sort of taken on a co-directing role. The person who runs alternative stories is called Chris Gregory. The Dex Legacy is the first full series that he commissioned. When I first did anything, it was just episode 1 of the Dex Legacy. I thought it was going to be a standalone. It was for his podcast. It's like an anthology podcast. He covers all genres in that, all types of podcast in that one show. And he put out The Bomb as part of his sci-fi offering. And then it did really well. And it was the best performing episode of the entire podcast for the entire year. And he was like, it turns out he's a massive Hitchhiker's nerd as well, so, you know, like, we kind of vibe. And he then was like, okay, so do you want to do a sequel? And I was like, okay. And, you know, in my head I'm thinking sequel, I'm thinking trilogy, I'm thinking, oh, exciting, but okay, yeah, sequel, let's keep it cool. And it turns out that he was also thinking sequel, trilogy, entire show, possibly the rest of our lives. And yeah, so it was, you know, I think when it comes, for me, working with him, it was the first sort of baby step. There's like a first chapter to that relationship. And then it went from there, and he was like, oh yay, I've always wanted to produce a full series of drama and like really get my teeth into that and not necessarily just do it episode by episode. And, you know, I think that working with somebody who's able to, you know, he was able to bring a whole bank of actors to the work. If I was just a writer on my own, going into it, I would have to try and make the contacts, I would have to approach actors, I would have to find all of the money myself, I would have to do all of these things on my own. Because he'd done a lot of production, he was able to give the framework. He was able to say, okay, this is how you get it onto all of the platforms, this is how you do all of those things. Here's a bank of really great actors that I've worked with before, and, you know, these are the voices that I think would work best. Obviously I'm like, okay, and, you know, but working with somebody like that helps. Otherwise you're sort of going into it like, it's like, am I? Yeah, okay, it would be very much harder to do that, yeah.
Could I just talk from the perspective of like a writer wanting to make their own production? If anyone out there wants to give it a go and make your own production, it has never been easier at the same time. Like, if you've got an idea, put it out there, and you never know what's going to happen. Just get yourself a decent mic, please.
Yeah,
Please.
That's actually leads really well into the next question, which is what can fiction writers in other mediums learn from the audio drama scene and also from the audio scene, and how can they make use of audio in their own work, or how might they want to?
It's another way, especially with a small press or an independent press, or even with traditional publishing. We have so much competition now. It's very, very hard to be discovered, and it's hard to make a living in this industry. So audio just provides another avenue where you may find your people. They're out there. You've just got to work out, you know, if you've got a good thing that you're writing, if you're writing good scripts, or if you're writing good prose, your people will be there. It just provides another way that you could potentially find them. And I think it's wonderful. It's certainly something people should really give a go and see how it works. Yeah. And it's cheap. Let's face it, if you've got a good mic, it's cheap. It's not that hard to do. Yeah.
And at that level it can start as a marketing tool.
Yes.
So it doesn't have to be a product.
No.
And I think he's definitely very useful for any form of writer, whether non-fiction, fiction, or any genre, at that basic level. And then the more comfortable you get at dealing with it at that level. You know, some people are very good at speaking their own stories, other people wouldn't wish to attempt that. But you can start small. I bought a Zoom for £400. It's the most I've spent for a long time on a mic. But boy, is it worth it. And I've got a little stereo attachment. And it's just absolutely fantastic. I can be in a crowded room and really pick out the sounds that I want and isolate it afterwards. So that's stood me in good stead for about 4 years now.
So I think you don't need to spend a lot of money at all on equipment. If you get any USB microphone,
Yeah.
you will be much better than an internal microphone on a phone or a
That's
laptop.
true.
Yeah,
Any USB microphone, get it as far away from your computer as possible. Ideally, get it.
I like that nice hum.
Ideally, don't have it connected to your computer at all. Have it something that connected to something that doesn't have a fan, like your phone or a Raspberry Pi or something.
That's very cheap.
The single best thing you can do for your sound quality is to be in a room with lots of soft furnishings.
Or a wardrobe.
Yeah.
The duvet over the head is
Yes.
Duvet
honoured
over the head
tradition.
is a mixed blessing. If you are very still, it's fine.
Yes.
But if you move at all, there's
It's
going to be
awful.
rustling. Rustling is bad.
Muffins.
I've got a little box thing, okay, so it's about this big, and it's got soundproofing stuff in it. It's big enough just for the microphone, and so the microphone goes in it and points forward. That way, everything that's away from the microphone is padded, and then I have that, and I have my laptop. I do have my laptop, but it's one without fans.
It's
So
got a flash drive.
it's a silent. It's one of the and then I sit on the floor, and I've got my duvet that goes over the top. Right, so this is my little cave, and then it all works because I'm playing a robot. Okay, and robots don't move, so you're sitting on the floor with your thing, with your setup, and then I play the robot, and the robot and it doesn't move. But yeah, as soon as you sort of introduce movement, it's it's a bit
This
tricky.
is where we should start talking about AI and audio.
Yeah.
Surely a robot.
It's not the same if it's not
AI
played by a
just
human.
Okay, we're going to have a couple of questions from the audience, if that's okay, and then we're going to wrap up. Yes?
Just quickly, point of order, there's a BBC audio drama, half an hour, that was written by Andrew Sachs called The Revenge, which is a murder story that's entirely told with binaural sound effects. 1978, if you're interested.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Some of us are old enough to have listened to Hitchhiker's First Time Round. When they made it for television, they spoiled it completely.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I've never got over Captain dying on Archers. So I'm old enough for that sort of stuff. But going forward, my wife's a writer. She's done voice acting for games apps for the bit they put in after the game.
Yep.
Sorry for not being too technical, but that's what she's done. And sometimes she's sitting there and she's an orc, and she's got a mic and the pop filter, pop screen, and I made her an acoustic wall to go behind her, and she's sitting there going, and then she's an old lady and she's doing her old lady bit. Going forward, where do we find people with acting voices like Sasha's, who are clear, who can interpret what my wife's written as she wants it recorded? Because again, Stephen Fry's great. No, I'm sure everybody loves him, but we know it's Stephen Fry. Her work is not Stephen Fry.
Sorry, I'm not sure I quite understand the question. So is she...
I'm looking for openings for finding the right people to
Actors.
read
Yeah.
what she's written without
Right,
putting her
right.
through the effort.
Yeah.
Because she could do it,
Mm.
but by the time she's read
Yeah, no, there's
20, 30 pages, she'll be cream crackered.
Right, okay, so where to find, like,
Good
voice
voice
actors?
actors.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a Discord, an audio drama Discord. The audio drama community
Yes.
in the UK is really active and
Right.
really supportive. I'll find the name of the Discord for you, and it's huge. There's actors on there. I mean, I put out a call for decks, and I got loads of people, really top quality actors on there. Other audio dramas are on there, so you can ask them for recommendations, and they'll come back to you. There's a lot of actors on there with a lot of different ranges of price point. It is called the Audio Drama Lab.
Oh right, yeah.
Is the thing, huge number of channels, and yeah, it's great. if she doesn't have access to that, she can go on Twitter
Yeah,
and find people. Yeah.
we need to find somewhere else.
Yes.
You see, that's an old boys network game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good place.
Yeah, social media, I would say, is the other thing.
The other thing I'd say from a sheer marketing perspective, if you're looking for an actor to do, depending on what she's writing, listen to the voices that are being used for audio productions in your specific neck of the woods in that genre. Hear what the readers want to hear, and maybe, you know, you can always see if a narrator who's already in that genre working across the board there, because listeners like to hear the same voice sometimes, and that can really give a book a boost. If you've got the same narrator, or a similar narrator. So if it's all for example, a female voice in your genre or a male voice, or something, and they've got a particular timbre, keep that in mind before you actually pick someone out. That would be my recommendation.
I think we had another question. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there were kind of almost two spectrums kind of discussed over that kind of like the pure narration to the fully acted, and also podcasts have really kind of democratized really low budget to BBC budget. Is there somewhere in there where you reach an uncanny valley where it just doesn't work? Because like a really low budget podcast can come out like really charming, and something with like the budget, like say Sandman, which has come out on Audible, and like with its full kind of cast and full sound effects, can sound amazing. Is there somewhere in the middle where it just kind of starts to fall apart and it just goes like that doesn't work?
I think so. I've heard one or two productions lately where they would have been better choosing one or the other. But I think it's just got to match what the genre demands. So if you're trying to do a really you can get away with stuff that sounds a lot more amateur with genre fiction, as long as the intent is clear. You're winking at your listeners and going, yes, we know it sounds crappy, and you know it sounds crappy, but that's half the fun. Like, as long as they're on board, and with the high production, if you don't have the budget to really hit it, it can. My experience is that it can sometimes be a bit cringe when it doesn't quite hit.
Yeah, I agree. You want to try and keep your production levels up. Do your best.
I think usually you want to hit the fundamentals,
Yeah.
right? So if the writing, the narration, and the mic is good,
Yeah.
probably all right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's our time. So thank you so much to all of our panel. I'm just going to ask very quickly, if there's anything that our panel would like to plug before we say goodbye.
Is there anything you'd like to plug?
There's maybe something I would like to plug. Yes. So Dex Legacy, if you're interested in the show, I've got a book here that I've written. It's collected scripts and commentary. If you're ever thinking of doing a audio drama, this is a great guide for getting started and how it works and how to write the scripts and character and all of the rest of it. In there, if you're interested, I've got QR codes so you can find it immediately, and yeah, just come and grab that for me, and yeah, just come grab what you want from, like, and quickly, obviously. Yeah, cool.
Check out podcast.org and escapeartists.net.
Check out overlondon.net if you like Pratchettian style comic fantasy, anything Monty Python-esque. Give it a go.
Come to our launch tomorrow for Anna Smith's Spark and Alan's Child at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Oh, and you can check out my mini-series of That Colossal Wreck on Inkpen coming up, and also... okay, no, that one's not been announced, so I actually can't say that.